On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Akshay Swaminathan. He is a data scientist who works in strengthening health systems. He actually has had 40 peer-reviewed publications. His work has been featured in the New York Times. And he actually was a data scientist in the field, Flatiron Health, head of data science at Cerebral, and is currently an AI researcher and a medical student and PhD candidate at the same time at Stanford University. Akshay, I appreciate your time to come on the show.
Thanks for having me, Amir. Great to be here.
Absolutely. So this episode, we're going to be talking about using data to improve how we deliver healthcare. When we talked about it, with your background, given your depth within the actual field as a practitioner and understanding of the healthcare systems, thought this would be a great episode. I have been talking to people about domain specificity. It's becoming, I think, a growing topic within data science and the value. Just to start with, when we talk about wanting to deliver better healthcare using data, first of all, what does that even mean? As a data scientist, as also an MD and PhD candidate at Stanford University, what does that mean to you?
So when we talk about healthcare delivery, to me that means getting the right treatment to the right patient at the right time. Right. So this could be identifying patients who are going through suicidal crises, right? Getting them connected with timely resources. It could mean understanding a person's genotype, phenotype, and deciding what is the best treatment choice for their given condition, right? So all these things, to sum it up, right? Getting the right treatment to the right patient at the right time. That's what I see as delivery, and data science can play a role in any step of that process.
Absolutely. And I guess I'm a recruiter that comes from the engineering world, so it's not a very common thing. I guess within data science, I'd imagine, if I'm wrong, please correct me. If somebody out there is listening, if you want to correct me, feel free. But I'd imagine most people who are in data science are not actual former practitioners or have actually had been within that specific domain. They might have experience in that domain, but they weren't, the depth of understanding is a little bit different of understanding the domain versus actually having, been within the domain. Are you seeing that as a trend? Is it an anomaly? I mean, you have a very interesting background, and if you want to talk about it, absolutely. But is this a trend? Is there something you're seeing in this?
So I will say, at least in the healthcare field, there is a growing interest in data and data science. And so you do have people who are being trained in healthcare, but then branching off and, maybe they do a master's in a data science field, or maybe they work on a project as the main technical IC. So that is happening more and more. But what I see as a larger trend, and really the more sustainable trend in my view, is working within cross-functional teams, right? So whenever you want to deploy a data science project, maybe the traditional paradigm, and still what a lot of places do, is they have the data science team that's responsible for building the product, and then they have a PM or a management team, and then there's the end users, which are often the clinicians. So it's almost like 2 or 3 separate entities, each with their own swim lane, and they're working within their silos, building these products. And then when things get deployed, it just doesn't work out. And so the successful teams that I've been a part of have been cross-functional from day zero, right? We'll have clinicians in the room, we'll have engineers in the room, we'll have data people in the room. And that really is the trend that I'm seeing more and more. And that's what I advocate for, what people in my field advocate for in healthcare, is implementation science, right? Implementing translational data science requires interdisciplinary collaboration.
I like that, implementational science. And I mean, that makes sense, right? So traditional IT projects do have a subject matter expert. And most technology projects do have a poor success rate. Like, it has been talked about, established for 30, 40 years. Do you think, as you're seeing within data science, within the component of having that subject matter expert, the depth and extent to which they're involved, is that directly impacting how successful a data science project can go?
100%. And this point is actually why my colleague Howard Friedman and I recently came out with this book, Winning with Data Science, right? And the motivation for writing this book is we realize that the success of data science projects often lies with the stakeholder, with the domain expert, with the collaborator, the customer, whatever you want to call them, right? To what extent do they ask the right questions? To what extent do they challenge the assumptions? To what extent can they speak the language of data science, right? And so there are tons of resources out there for people who want to become data scientists, right? Do the analysis, learn how to code, learn the statistics. Far fewer resources for people who work with data scientists and want to learn how can I effectively leverage my domain expertise to be an effective collaborator, right? If I'm a clinician, what are the questions I should be asking? Where should I be pushing back? And then also, you need to have some grounding in knowledge, right? You need to know some of the terms. You need to speak the common language, right? You know, as we there's an example that we talk about, which is if you're working with a contractor to redo your kitchen, right, and you want that project to go successfully, you have to be able to ask the right questions, right? What are we optimizing for? Are we optimizing for space? Are we optimizing for functionality? Are we optimizing for being able to accommodate a bunch of people in the kitchen, right? You have to challenge assumptions, right? Why does this countertop have to go here? Why can't we rip this thing out and put it on this side instead, right? And then you have to be able to speak the language, right? You have to know what is a backsplash, what is an island, what is a cabinet refacing, right? You just have to be able to communicate these basic things to have those conversations. So that's why we wrote the book. And because we believe so strongly that we need to empower domain experts to become effective collaborators.
I love that. A good friend of mine, he actually once said that you judge someone's expertise by the depth of questions they can ask. And I think what you talk about, the clinicians learning how to interface with data science. Traditionally, we've asked the technology side to learn the domain, go talk to them. I guess I'm hearing maybe the easier gap is for the functional side to learn some of the terms and some of the concepts, some of the potential of what data science can do, because obviously they have that domain expertise, which is multiple years, of gaining knowledge, versus a data scientist that has to come and understand an absolutely brand new domain. When you are looking at teams and you're looking at trying to empower those teams, and obviously these people are working, they're busy. How do you get somebody to stop and spend the time to go, hey, I'm going to be working on this data science project. It's going to help me. It's for me. How do I help myself assimilate some of the stuff they're talking about?
So, I mean, one thing is it has to go both ways, right? We need a culture of intellectual humility where both sides recognize what each party is bringing to the table. So definitely has to go both ways. And actually, we've seen that in that the book has become very popular with data scientists, which we weren't really envisioning. But one thing we do that's kind of unique in the book is it's actually written as a story. It's written as a narrative that follows these two fictional characters. And what's cool is we actually write out the dialogue, right? You have this, Kamala, who's an MD MBA character, talking with Dave, who's the manager of the data science team. And so we actually have the dialogue written out back and forth to show what is a good communication dynamic, what does a good dialogue look like between these two parties. To your second point, how do you operationalize this? I think one thing you said, which is kind of true, is the domain experts can get very far with just a few simple changes, a few simple questions, kind of this 80-20 rule, right? What are the 20% of questions that you can ask to get 80% of the value? And so a lot of it, very simple things. How are we defining this variable? How are we defining this outcome, right? What is the data source that we're using, right? How are we dealing with missing data, right? Just basic questions like these. And actually at the end of every chapter in the book, we write out, a dozen or so questions like these that you can just take immediately into your next meeting, right? But I think just by asking these questions I would encourage your listeners, just try it, right? And in your next conversation with a technical person, ask one of these questions, and I bet you that the answer you get will prompt some interesting dialogue.
Very interesting. And I guess as we're also talking at a higher level, we're talking about that, really stakeholder engagement. When you're looking at these products being rolled out, and obviously we see a lot of companies focusing on trying to improve patient care, healthcare. Adoption is consistently something I hear about because it has to fit within the workflow. They're already busy. They have insurance pressures. They have very limited time. They already have all these constraints. So adoption is a big hurdle. When you're thinking about their involvement through the project, how does that impact the adoption of whatever solution we're talking about?
It has such a critical role to play in adoption. And I'll tell you about, one example where I think we got this right. So the problem we were trying to solve, this was at Cerebral. So every day we were getting thousands of chat messages from our patients where they could say anything from, hey, I need help scheduling an appointment. I didn't get my meds on time. They can also say, I'm having a really bad day. I want to hurt myself, right? Or worse. And in those instances, you want to intervene with those patients as quickly as possible. So we had a totally manual system where sometimes patients were waiting. Actually, the average response time was over 10 hours for patients to get a response. And so if you have someone who's suicidal, 10 hours is not acceptable as a response time, right? So we wanted to design a system that would detect these messages, these concerning crisis messages in near real time, service them to our crisis response team. And what we did was we brought in the crisis team from day zero, right? We learned about their system, we shadowed them. And what we found is that they do all their work in Slack, right? All the work of identifying, okay, this patient just messaged in saying this thing. Let me create a chat with their clinician. Let's activate the crisis response protocol. All of that happens within Slack. And in understanding that, we were able to design a system that surfaced the model outputs within Slack. So we created a Slack channel where periodically the model would just send in the concerning messages that it identified. And we set up a system so that the crisis specialist can just click a button saying, yes, this is truly a crisis, or no, this is not a crisis. So we're also collecting labels, right, in real time that we can use for retraining purposes. But we integrated it within their existing workflow. So they didn't have to learn a new system. They didn't have to leave and go into another platform. And after we implemented this, we were able to reduce response times from 10 hours to under 10 minutes. And I think, this is an example of where we got it right. We worked with them from the beginning, understood their workflows, and designed a solution that met them where they were. And I'll tell you, the tech here was the least impressive part of this. It was the simplest. It was a penalized logistic regression model with TF-IDF features. And for folks in the NLP world, they know that's pretty much as simple as you can get in terms of model architecture. So, but the real value is that we were able to deploy it within a clinical workflow that was acceptable, that feasible, that fit within what they were doing. And it was a seamless integration, and that's why it's had such a huge impact. It's identified over 5,000 true crises since it was deployed over almost 2 years ago now.
I guess when you're kind of thinking ahead of, as AI is becoming more commonplace in our discussions, when it comes to healthcare, I mean, the solution you just talked about, it sounds like had a big impact, fit within their workflow. As you're envisioning future solutions coming to market, are we going to see a trend of more of a co-pilot, guidance, or are we going to see more of a here is the better response if you want to consider it? Because obviously within healthcare, I mean, practitioners tend to build experience; they have expertise. There is that bit of adoption of having them have that co-pilot component. Whereas right now, software engineers love those co-pilot type applications. It's doing a lot of the lifting. It's freeing their time up. How do you envision some of the future solutions working with practitioners?
Simply put, you can categorize the types of tasks that AI is going to be used for in healthcare into two types. One is very automatable tasks for which we pretty much know what a good response looks like in the moment. For example, patient messages in with a question, hey, can you help me schedule my appointment? someone responds, sure, follow this link and, enter your information there. We know how to respond to that, right? It just takes a human to go in and type it out. But there's no real ambiguity there. There's another type of task, which is much more complex, for which we don't necessarily know what the ideal outcome is at the time of, inference. For example, patient presents with a complex medical history. They've tried a number of treatments. They've all failed. What is the next appropriate course of action? Clinicians can't know for sure. Humans can't know for sure. So I think in these two different scenarios, you're going to have different approaches. In the first scenario, where the ideal outcome is pretty much well known, well defined, we need to be able to scale those. So we need to get to full automation. So we need to get to a world where we can rely on LLMs and AI to safely, automate away those tasks. To get there, I think it's going to start with a Copilot solution until we can develop guardrails for the edge cases, right? If you have a chatbot system that's answering, routine patient questions, and then all of a sudden a patient says, "Hey, I'm bleeding from, this place, or I have severe chest pain. I think I'm having a heart attack," right? You need to deal with those edge case scenarios. So as we develop the systems to deal with that, it's going to be a Copilot solution, but eventually I think those tasks are going to be fully automated away with maybe some human oversight, right? So you might have, a human monitoring a couple dozen such AI agents, for example. The other type of task, the diagnostic tasks, the clinical reasoning tasks, those I think we are still quite far from complete automation. Those are going to require human in the loop, AI augmenting the abilities of human clinicians, Copilot solutions. And, we're already seeing a number of these where the AI feedback is one data point that the clinician takes into consideration when making a decision.
I guess maybe the flip opposite, and I haven't asked this question of many people, but you talked about obviously two different types of solutions. One will be near term, one's longer term out. And obviously data is core to drive a lot of these solutions. Flip side to that, what's going to potentially stop us from taking advantage of these solutions? Because healthcare has had a reputation for a long time of not having the best data, the best interoperability. What are some of the issues that you could foresee, or maybe some of the obstacles within data that you'd be like, this might impact us delivering these longer term goals?
I'll talk about two. So the first is data quality and all the related biases. And the second is the interoperability and data sharing. So the first piece, these systems are only as good as the data that they're trained on. And we've seen so many examples of AI systems that have been trained on data sets that are not representative of real world tasks. Just a quick example, Google developed a vision model to detect diabetic retinopathy. They tried deploying it in a global setting in Thailand. They found that the system just did not work at all because the quality of images that were being captured in the local clinic were way lower than the quality of images that the model was trained on. That's just one simple example. We've seen even worse examples where AI models perpetuate, racial biases, debunked race-based myths and beliefs. And so that is certainly going to be a hurdle, right? There have been many studies that have come out showing that the use of AI models in clinical decision-making can actually exacerbate race-based disparities. So I think that's going to be a huge barrier to adoption. And I think the solution is going to be in data collection, right? We need to collect data that we can train these models on so that they basically higher quality data. A lot of these models are trained on the internet, to put it simply, right? The internet is not the highest quality data set to begin with for general tasks, not to mention, for healthcare tasks, right? So how can we effectively curate high quality training data sets that represent a diversity of patient populations, a diversity of healthcare tasks, a diversity of clinician opinions? We have 123 different clinical specialties, right? Everything from cardiology to nephrology to general surgery to neurosurgery, right? Each of those clinical specialties has their own set of values and beliefs and preferences about how care should be delivered. we have not even begun to scratch the surface of understanding, okay, how do we document, record, and code all the preferences of these different clinicians. So that's the data piece. The other piece is the data sharing piece. One big limitation of healthcare AI is that we're just not able to use a lot of the data that we have because of privacy, because they contain so much patient information, right? So we need ways to de-identify data at scale, share data between institutions, right? A huge thing that happens in healthcare AI is we built a model, we tested it on data from our institution, it works great. But you can't test it, you can't make claims about the performance of your model. You're only testing it on one site, right? How do these things generalize across multi-sites? But that's very difficult to do because of our inability to share data. And so we need to work on de-identification of data at scale. We need to work on things like federated learning, which allow you to learn from different data sets, train models on different data sets without violating HIPAA privacy laws. And the whole interoperability piece. I was just in India a few months ago, and they had just launched this universal payment infrastructure. They call it UPI. It's basically Venmo, but administered by the government. And so everyone has a QR code. Everyone from high-powered business people to street side fruit vendors, right? So you can go and scan a QR code and make a payment, and that's all administered by the government. Now they're working on the same thing for EHRs, right? So everyone has a QR code. You scan your QR code, you can send your EHR information. That will never happen in the US, as far as I'm concerned, because we're so fragmented from a data perspective, whereas India is starting from a clean slate, right? Pretty much. And so I think that interoperability, it's so hard if you build a model, at say Stanford, and we want to deploy that at a Kaiser. It's so difficult to make that happen seamlessly because the infrastructure is just totally different.
That's a great example. Very interesting, because I think I've had people on from insurance health systems, and I find it fascinating that the amount of data about care. I went through 2 hip surgeries in the last couple of years, and the first one, no one could see what was being done elsewhere. Especially I went to a PT that was not within their hospital system. By the second one, they had upgraded systems, and at least the PT could see some information, and that changed the care. It was dramatically different in terms of what they wanted to see. They were communicating measurements that they all wanted to know, versus before they'd give it to me in a piece of paper and I take it to the doctor. So, and that's a crude form of what we're talking about. What you're talking about, what you're seeing in India is very fascinating. It strikes me as the next great idea should stem on 2 things: data collection and addressing quality, and some kind of interoperability, which may never happen, as you said, but I think those are great ones. Before I let you go, I just want to touch on the data quality piece, because I asked leaders in other domains this question, and I find it interesting because AI sounds like it is going to do amazing things. There are companies that sit on legacy data that still do not do simple BI very well. Like, they still struggle with BI, and they're seeing opportunities to leapfrog and go, hey, we're going to come in, build new structures. We're going to take advantage of data science and machine learning algorithms. When you're thinking about companies and how they might handle this, right? Especially companies that have a lot of data. Startups are different. They have less data, but they have better infrastructure. Larger companies have a lot more data. Sometimes it's a very generalized statement, but how do you see companies, especially in the healthcare domain, dealing with, yes, we have a lot of data, but we really don't have some of the advanced skills or technologies in place to leverage it?
Yeah, my piece here is always start with the problem, right? Don't start with the solution. Don't come at it from how can we use Gen AI, right? That is the worst way to frame your approach to this, and almost an approach that's guaranteed to lead to wasted effort and resources. Start with, what are the highest value business problems, and what is the right solution to solve those, right? And sometimes the solution might be, let's make a table, let's make a bar graph. One of the highest impact projects I ever worked on at Cerebral, my first project at Cerebral, we created personalized data reports for each clinician that showed data on who are all their patients, who is highest acuity, who do they need to schedule an appointment with ASAP. All summary statistics, all just basic descriptive data analysis, but super high impact. And so my hot take here is that a lot of companies aren't ready for Gen AI because they don't have any problems that require Gen AI, right? And like you said, if you're sitting on a ton of data, you don't even have simple BI infrastructure in place, start there. I'm sure that there are some just questions that you can answer just by making some simple tables and graphs.
I love it. That's a good point to end on, and I 100% agree with you. It sounds really awesome. It sounds amazing, but I think people need to take a step back and still focus on their business. Akshay, appreciate your time. If someone wants to reach out to you, first of all, I know you have a book, fascinating book, because I think it's going to give a lot of people in the data science space a lot of insights. How do they get in touch with you if they want to pick your brain on something, and how do they actually get the book?
So to learn more about the book, you can go to winningwithdatascience.com. That's one word, winningwithdatascience.com. And then to learn more about me and to get in touch with me, you can go to my website, which is my first name, last name.com, akshayswaminathan.com.
Okay, awesome. We'll make sure we include some of those links in the show notes for you. And I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Samir. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. That's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, we did cover a lot of ground with how data can help improve healthcare, patient care, patient outcomes. I think Akshay had some great viewpoints. Please share this with somebody else who might find it interesting. I think the more we talk about it, the better. And also like, subscribe, comment. Let us know how we might be doing on that podcast. I always want your feedback. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.